The fluorescent lights in Boston Federal Courthouse felt like ice picks drilling into my temples as I watched Marcus lean back in his leather chair, that Ivy League smirk plastered across his face like he'd already won. 4 years of marriage, and I was finally seeing him for the predator he really was. But nothing could have prepared me for what came out of his mouth next. "Your Honor." Marcus's lawyer stood up, his $1,000 suit catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. "My client has been extraordinarily patient during these proceedings. Doctor, Chen has attempted to portray herself as the sole creator of her success, but the evidence clearly shows my client's integral role in building the marital estate." Judge Robert Martinez, a no-nonsense man in his early 60s with steel grey hair and sharp eyes, looked over the rim of his reading glasses. "Mr. Jacobson, please state your client's final position for the record." Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his Rolex, the one I'd bought him for our 2nd anniversary, back when I still thought he loved me for more than my bank account. He turned to face me directly, and that's when I saw it, that gleam in his green eyes. The same look he got when he closed a big venture capital deal, except this time, I was the deal. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for anything unreasonable here," Marcus said, his voice carrying that practiced confidence that had charmed me 4 years ago at that TED conference. "Massachusetts follows equitable distribution in divorce. I'm simply requesting what I've rightfully earned through my contributions to this marriage." He paused for effect, like he was giving one of his keynote speeches at investment summits. "That includes 50% of my wife's biotech company, Neogene Therapeutics, currently valued at $25 million. It also includes 50% of the pharmaceutical patent portfolio she inherited from her late father 2 years ago. 12 patents for cancer treatments currently generating $800,000 annually in licensing fees, with a total valuation of approximately $12 million. My hands clenched into fists under the mahogany table. My father's patents. The man who'd spent 30 years of his life developing affordable cancer treatments, who died believing his work would help millions of people who couldn't afford the astronomical costs of big pharma. Marcus wanted to take half of my father's legacy and turn it into his personal ATM. But then Marcus did something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle or an embarrassed smile. A full, loud, confident laugh that echoed through the silent courtroom like he'd just heard the punchline to the world's funniest joke. "I mean, honestly," he said, looking around at the gallery like he was performing for an audience at one of his Stanford networking events. "I'm walking out of here with half of $25 million plus ongoing patent royalties, and there's absolutely nothing she can do to stop it. The law is crystal clear on this." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps echoed from the back rows where journalists had been quietly taking notes. My lawyer, David Park, muttered something in Korean that I was pretty sure wasn't appropriate for a federal courthouse. Someone in the gallery actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. Judge Martinez brought his gavel down hard. "Order. Order in this court." But Marcus kept laughing, his head thrown back like this was the greatest triumph of his career. Like destroying me was just another successful exit strategy. "Apologies, Your Honor," Marcus said, wiping his eyes with theatrical flair. "But you have to admit, this is pretty straightforward. I made the right investment 4 years ago when I married her. Time to cash out." That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger. I was way past anger. It was something colder, calmer, more calculated. I'd spent 6 months listening to him and his shark lawyer paint me as some greedy scientist trying to hide assets from her devoted husband. I'd watched Marcus lie under oath about supporting my research, about being a loving partner, about somehow deserving half of everything my father had worked his entire life to create. But I had something Marcus didn't know about, something sitting in my leather briefcase that was about to change everything. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. The courtroom went dead silent, every eye in the room fixed on me as I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive, the kind you could buy at any Staples for $10. But this one contained information worth millions. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked toward Judge Martinez's bench. I could feel Marcus's eyes burning holes in my back. His laughter had died completely. I could practically hear his brain working, trying to figure out what I was doing, what I could possibly have that would matter now. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite my heart hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Before you make any rulings, I think you need to review some additional evidence that's come to light. Evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings. Judge Martinez took the USB drive, his thick eyebrows rising with curiosity. He gestured to his clerk, who quickly brought over a laptop. The courtroom held its collective breath as he plugged in the drive and began clicking through files. I watched his face transform. Confusion, surprise. Then, something that looked almost like disgust. He looked up at Marcus, then back down at the screen, then at Marcus again, his jaw tightening. And then Judge Robert Martinez did something I'd never seen a judge do in any courtroom, real or fictional. He burst out laughing. 4 years earlier, I never imagined I'd end up in a divorce court watching a judge laugh at my soon-to-be ex-husband. Back then, I thought I'd found my fairy tale ending. It was February 2020, at the TED conference in Vancouver. I'd just delivered my presentation, CRISPR Revolution, making cancer treatment accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. 20 minutes of explaining how my company was using gene editing technology to create affordable alternatives to treatments that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'd barely made it off stage when someone tapped my shoulder. Dr. Chen, that was absolutely brilliant. I turned around and felt my breath catch in my throat. The man standing behind me was tall, maybe 6'3", with perfectly styled dark hair that had just a touch of distinguished grey at the temples. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his green eyes sparkled with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. Marcus Sterling, he said, extending his hand. Sterling Ventures. We're a venture capital firm focused on healthcare innovation. I've been tracking Neogene's progress for the past year. What you're building isn't just impressive from a business standpoint, it's actually going to save lives. We shook hands. His grip was firm but not aggressive, confident but not domineering. You've been following my work? I asked, genuinely surprised. Most VCs I'd met could barely pronounce CRISPR, let alone understand the science behind it. Following it closely, he said with a warm smile. My nephew has leukemia. He's 8 years old. The treatment protocol costs his parents $300,000 a year. When I read about your work developing a CRISPR-based therapy that could cut that cost by 70%, he paused. And I saw real emotion flash across his face. That's not just disruption, Dr. Chen. That's hope. We ended up talking for 2 hours in the conference center's cafe. Unlike every other VC I'd encountered, the ones who only cared about hockey stick growth curves and exit multiples, Marcus actually understood the science. He asked intelligent questions about my research methodology, about regulatory pathways, about how we were addressing off-target effects in gene editing. You know what I love most about what you're doing, he said, as we walked toward the lobby. You're not just building a company to make yourself rich. You genuinely care about making medicine accessible to people who need it. That's rare in this industry. When he asked for my number to continue our conversation about potential partnership opportunities, I didn't hesitate. For the first time in years of running my company, I felt like I'd met someone who actually got it. Someone who understood that science wasn't just about shareholder returns. Our first official date was at this tiny Italian place in Boston's North End, 3 weeks after Vancouver. Marcus showed up with a single white orchid he'd remembered me mentioning. They were my favorite flower, and pulled out my chair like my father used to do for my mother. We talked until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs around us. I found myself sharing things I never told anyone. How terrified I was that Neogene would fail, and I'd have wasted 8 years of my life. How lonely it felt being the CEO, always having to project confidence, even when I was drowning in uncertainty. How guilty I felt about my father's death, wondering if the stress of my company had contributed to his heart attack. Sarah, Marcus said, reaching across the candlelit table to take my hand. His touch was warm, solid, reassuring. What you've accomplished isn't luck, and it's not going to fail. You're one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, and you work harder than anyone I know. Don't let imposter syndrome rob you of recognizing your own genius. The next 8 months felt like living in a romantic movie. Marcus would surprise me with lunch deliveries when I was pulling 18-hour days in the lab. He'd send flowers to my office with notes that said things like, "For the woman who's going to cure cancer one CRISPR edit at a time." He even enrolled in an online genetics course so he could better understand my work. When Neogene got FDA fast-track designation that September, Marcus threw me a surprise celebration. He'd rented out the entire private dining room at number 9 Park and invited all my colleagues, my research team, even my old professors from MIT. He stood up and gave this beautiful speech about how proud he was to be with someone who was changing the world. On our 1-year anniversary, he proposed. Right there in the same hotel conference room where we'd first met at TED. He'd somehow convinced the organizers to let us in after hours. He got down on one knee in the exact spot where I'd delivered my presentation, with a ring that sparkled like a tiny star under the stage lights. "Dr. Sarah Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've made me believe that love and ambition aren't mutually exclusive, that I can support someone's dreams without competing with them. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being your biggest champion?" Through tears of happiness, I said yes. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. I had my dream career, groundbreaking research, and now a partner who understood and celebrated all of it. My father had one concern, though. At our engagement dinner, he pulled me aside in his study, surrounded by the medical journals and research papers he'd spent decades accumulating. "Sweetheart, I have to ask, did you and Marcus discuss a prenuptial agreement?" I'd been slightly offended. "Dad, Marcus isn't like that. He has his own successful career. He makes good money at Sterling Ventures. We're partners." My father had just sighed, that sad, knowing look in his eyes that I didn't understand then. Sarah, prenups aren't about questioning love. They're about protecting your work if love ends, especially with your company growing so fast and with the patents I'll be leaving you someday. Dad, don't talk like that. You're only 62, and Marcus would never. Just promise me you'll think about it. I'd hugged him, I promise. But you're worrying about nothing. 6 months later, my father died of a massive heart attack in his laboratory. He was working on optimizing the synthesis pathway for one of his cancer treatments, trying to make it even more affordable when his heart just gave out. At the funeral, Marcus held me as I sobbed. He gave a beautiful eulogy about my father's legacy of putting patients before profits. He seemed genuinely devastated. I leaned on him completely during those dark months of grief. When the lawyers read my father's will 3 weeks later, I was shocked by the magnitude of what he'd left me. 12 pharmaceutical patents for various cancer treatments, current licensing agreements generating $800,000 annually. Total portfolio value, $12 million. Everything he'd built over 30 years of research, all because he believed I was the only one in the family who understood that money was just a tool to help people, not an end in itself. Marcus's reaction should have been my first warning sign, but I was too deep in grief to notice. 12 million, he'd said that night, staring at the legal documents spread across our dining room table. His eyes had a glittery quality I'd never seen before. "Sarah, do you understand what this means? We could pay off the house, buy that place in Martha's Vineyard, maybe even open a second office for Sterling Ventures in San Francisco. This changes everything." "We?" I'd asked quietly. "Marcus, this was my father's life work. These patents represent 30 years of him choosing research over profit, choosing to help people over getting rich." His face had darkened for just a second before the smile returned. "Of course, babe. I just meant we're married now. We're a team. Your success is my success, right? That's what partnership means." But his behavior started shifting in ways that made my stomach twist with unease. He began making expensive purchases without discussing them with me first. A $70,000 Tesla Model S, a Patek Philippe watch collection that cost more than my annual research budget, designer suits from Brioni that ran $5,000 each. When I questioned the spending, he'd get defensive. "Sarah, I'm not some charity case you picked up off the street. I have my own income, my own career. Besides, we're married. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. Isn't that how this works?" Except I noticed it was always my accounts being drawn down. My company profits, my patent royalties. The red flags kept accumulating. He suggested we restructure our finances for tax optimization. His explanation was smooth, professional, convincing he was the investment expert, after all. And I was just a scientist who happened to start a company. So I added his name to several business accounts, to the patent licensing revenue streams, to the trust my father had established. He started meeting with financial advisors behind my back. I found business cards in his jacket pocket from wealth management firms, estate planning attorneys, and one that made my blood run cold: Jacobson and Associates high net worth divorce specialists. When I confronted him about it, he'd laughed it off with that charming smile that was starting to feel more calculated than warm. "Babe, you're being paranoid. I'm just trying to make sure we're properly protected. With your company worth $25 million and the patent portfolio, we need sophisticated planning. I'm looking out for us." But the way he said us didn't feel like partnership anymore. It felt like possession. I started noticing other things too. How he'd steer conversations away from my research when we were at his firm's events. How he'd interrupt my calls with potential partners to offer his business perspective. How angry he'd gotten when I'd refused to make him a formal advisor to Neogene with equity compensation. "I've been supporting your dreams for 3 years," he'd said during one particularly heated argument, his face flushed with wine and resentment. "Attending your boring conferences, listening to you talk about genes and proteins I don't care about, playing the supportive husband. Don't you think I've earned something more than just being your cheerleader?" That's when I first wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But I pushed the thought away. This was Marcus, the man who'd wooed me with orchids and genuine interest in my work, the man who'd held me when my father died. He was just stressed. We were just going through a rough patch. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how much worse it was about to get. The truth hit me on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 3 years and 2 months into our marriage. I'd been debugging a protein synthesis model in my home office until 2 a.m., and I'd accidentally left my secondary laptop charger at the Neogene office downtown. Marcus had already left for work at Sterling Ventures, so I decided to surprise him with lunch from his favorite Thai place and grab my charger from the office while I was out. Sterling Ventures occupied the 18th floor of a gleaming tower in Boston's financial district. I'd been there dozens of times for holiday parties and client dinners. The receptionist waved me through with a friendly smile. "He's in conference room C with Victoria," she said cheerfully, "but I'm sure he won't mind you popping in." Victoria Ross, his business partner. The sharp, beautiful woman with an MBA from Wharton, who always made me feel inadequately dressed at firm events. Conference room C had floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the Boston Harbor. I could see Marcus inside, but he wasn't reviewing investment portfolios with Victoria. He had her pressed against the conference table, his hands tangled in her long auburn hair, kissing her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. She was laughing between kisses, running her manicured fingers down his chest, completely comfortable with the intimacy. This wasn't a moment of weakness. The casual familiarity of their touches, the way they moved together, this had been going on for a very long time. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, watching my husband betray everything we'd built together in broad daylight, in his workplace, where anyone could see. The bag of Thai food slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor, green curry exploding across the marble. Marcus's head snapped up. Our eyes met through the glass. For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face. Then, incredibly, he smiled. He gently pushed Victoria away and straightened his tie, like he'd just been caught doing something mildly inappropriate rather than destroying our marriage. I ran, made it to my car in the parking garage before the sobs started. 3 years of my life. 3 years of believing I'd found someone who valued me for more than my bank account and my father's legacy. All of it built on lies. Marcus came home that evening, acting like nothing had happened. Walked into our kitchen, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek like every other day for the past 3 years. "Hey babe, how was your day? You look exhausted." I stared at this man I'd shared my bed with, my dreams with, my father's life work with. "I saw you today, Marcus, at your office." His face didn't change. No guilt, no shame, no remorse, just a slight tightening around his eyes. "Saw me where?" "With Victoria. In conference room C." Marcus sighed and sat down at our kitchen island like we were discussing the weather. "Sarah, you're overreacting. Victoria and I work very closely together on high-stress deals. Sometimes boundaries get blurry. It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't mean anything?" My voice cracked. "You were kissing her like you're in love with her." I love you, he said, but his tone was mechanical, rehearsed. Victoria, just she understands the pressure I'm under in this industry. You're always so focused on your company, your research, your father's patents. A man has needs, Sarah. The casual cruelty of those words hurt worse than if he'd hit me. So this is my fault, because I work hard on groundbreaking medical research. Marcus's mask finally slipped, and I saw something cold and reptilian underneath. Look, Sarah, let's be adults here. This marriage has been mutually beneficial. You got a husband who supported your career and opened doors in the investment community. I got a lot of things. What's the problem? What did you just say? He stood up and walked to our wine fridge, pulling out a bottle of Chateau Margaux, the $300 wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and poured himself a glass like this was a normal evening. I'm saying I've invested 3 years of my life in this relationship, Sarah. 3 years of being the understanding husband, the cheerleader, the guy who pretends to care about CRISPR and genetic mutations. I've been patient. I've played my role. And now it's time for me to receive appropriate compensation for that investment. My entire body went cold. Compensation? For what? For loving your wife? Marcus took a slow sip of wine, savoring it. Sarah, you're worth over $30 million now between your company and your father's patents. I've been instrumental in building this life. Through my connections, my guidance, my support. Massachusetts uses equitable distribution in divorce. What's acquired or enhanced during marriage gets divided fairly. That includes business growth and inherited assets that I helped manage and monetize. I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a confession. This wasn't an apology or a moment of weakness. This was a negotiation, a business transaction. You planned this, I whispered. All of it. From the very beginning. Marcus smiled, and it was nothing like the warm smile that had made me fall in love with him 4 years ago at that TED conference. I planned to be successful, Sarah, and I am. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic, handing me the thick manila envelope. I'd been expecting them ever since Marcus moved out of our house and into what I later learned was Victoria's waterfront condo in Seaport. But seeing Chen v. Sterling printed across the top still felt like a physical blow. Marcus had hired Arthur Jacobson. And when I mentioned that name to David Park, my MIT classmate who'd become a family law attorney, his face went pale. Jacobson is a killer, Sarah. He's represented 4 tech executives' ex-husbands in the past 6 years. Every single one of those women lost at least 40% of everything they'd built. One lost her entire company. We're not just fighting Marcus here, we're fighting a machine designed to destroy wealthy women. The demands laid out in Marcus's filing were breathtaking. He wanted 50% of Neogene Therapeutics valued at $25 million, 50% of my father's patent portfolio worth $12 million, half of all marital assets, including my investment accounts, my car, even my father's research library that held 30 years of handwritten notes. But the most devastating part was how Jacobson's filing painted the narrative. According to their version, Marcus had been the devoted spouse who'd sacrificed his own career advancement to support my success. They claimed he'd provided critical business connections that directly led to Neogene's FDA fast-track designation. They argued he'd spent countless hours helping me refine investor pitches, introducing me to potential partners, even assisting with hiring decisions. All lies. But they were lies wrapped in enough truth to sound convincing. The worst claim was about my father's patents. Jacobson argued that while I'd inherited them during our marriage, Marcus had been instrumental in enhancing their value by helping me establish better licensing agreements and maximize royalty streams. Therefore, he claimed, the patents had become partially marital property subject to division. The problem, David explained during our strategy session, his Korean accent getting thicker as he got more agitated, is that inheritance is normally separate property in Massachusetts. But if Marcus can prove he significantly enhanced the value of your father's patents during your marriage, a judge might consider those enhancements to be marital property. He didn't enhance anything, I protested. He just spent the money they generated. I know that, and you know that. But Jacobson is excellent at creating narratives that judges find credible. The depositions were psychological warfare. Jacobson grilled me for 9 hours straight, twisting every conversation, every kind word I'd ever said about Marcus. every moment of normal marital partnership into evidence that he'd been essential to my success. Isn't it true, Dr. Chen, that your husband's introduction to Dr. Patricia Morrison at the Healthcare Innovation Summit led directly to your collaboration with Morrison Biopharm? That's not he introduced us at a party, but please answer yes or no. Did your husband introduce you to Dr. Morrison? Yes, but... And didn't that introduction result in a $3 million licensing deal for one of your father's patents? The science was already, yes or no, Dr. Chen. It went on like that for hours. Jacobson was a master at taking crumbs of truth and building mountains of lies around them. Meanwhile, Marcus played his part to perfection. During his deposition, he actually cried. Real tears. I could have made partner at Sterling Ventures 2 years ago, he said, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. But Sarah's company was growing so fast, she was so overwhelmed. I turned down the promotion so I could spend more time supporting her. I reviewed every major contract. I helped her prep for investor meetings. I spent my Saturdays in the lab with her when she was panicking about FDA submissions. More lies. Marcus had never once visited my lab on a Saturday. He couldn't tell a petri dish from a dinner plate. When Jacobson asked about the patents, Marcus's performance deserved an Oscar. Dr. Chen was like a father to me too, he said, his voice breaking convincingly. I spent holidays with him, listened to him talk about his research for hours. After he passed, Sarah was so devastated she couldn't think straight. I'm the one who organized the patent portfolio, who reached out to licensing partners, who optimized the royalty structure that doubled the annual revenue. Another lie. I'd done all of that while Marcus was apparently busy sleeping with Victoria. The most painful moment came when Jacobson presented evidence of Marcus's contributions emails, where I'd thanked him for his support, photos of us at industry conferences, even a recording of me introducing him as my partner in everything at a company celebration 3 years ago. Everything I'd said out of love was being weaponized against me. Dr. Chen, Jacobson said with a satisfied smile that made me want to throw something at him. Isn't it true that you yourself described your husband as an equal partner in your professional success? Sitting in that sterile conference room, watching my own words become chains to bind me, I felt more alone than I had since my father died. Marcus was going to win. We both knew it. 3 weeks before our final hearing, David walked into my Neogene office with an expression I'd never seen before, part determination, part barely contained excitement. Sarah, I need you to trust me on something completely. I want to hire a private investigator. I looked up from the financial forensics report I'd been reviewing for the 100th time, searching for any angle Jacobson hadn't already exploited. David, we've been over this. We can't afford to look vindictive or desperate. Judge Martinez already thinks I'm trying to hide assets. This isn't about vindictiveness. It's about survival. He closed my office door and sat across from my desk, leaning forward intently. Sarah, I've practiced family law for 15 years. I've seen men like Marcus Sterling before. They don't just wake up one day and decide to systematically destroy their wives. This is a pattern. This is a skill set. Something in his tone made me put down the report. What are you saying? I'm saying Marcus is too good at this. The way he positioned himself in your life, meeting you at TED, wooing you with your own passion for research, timing everything perfectly. How he managed to get you to add him to your accounts, how he's playing the devoted husband in court. It's like he's following a playbook. Sarah, I think he's done this before. David pulled out a business card and slid it across my desk. James Morrison. He's the best investigator in New England, specializes in financial fraud and complex matrimonial cases. If Marcus Sterling has secrets, James will find them. I stared at the card. How much will this cost? Everything we have left in the legal budget. But Sarah, if I'm right about Marcus, this could save everything your father worked for. James Morrison was nothing like the private investigators in movies. He was a quiet man in his 50s with thinning hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a college professor than someone who uncovered people's darkest secrets. I'll need complete access, he told us during our first meeting at David's office. Bank records, credit reports, employment history, social media archives. And I need you to tell me everything about your relationship with Marcus. From the very first meeting. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small. For the next 3 weeks, James worked 18-hour days. All. He traced Marcus's employment history across multiple states. He interviewed his former colleagues at investment firms, He tracked down college roommates, former neighbors, people who'd known him in different chapters of his life. I tried to focus on preparing for court, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Jacobson had filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the facts were so clearly in Marcus's favor that we didn't even need a trial. Just a judge dividing up my life's work like it was a marital china collection. Then, on a Friday afternoon 3 days before our final hearing, James called David with 4 words that made my blood pressure spike. "You need to see this." We met at David's office that evening. James had covered the entire conference table with documents, photographs, financial records like pieces of a puzzle that, assembled together, revealed something horrifying. "Marcus Sterling has done this twice before," James announced without preamble. He pointed to a photograph of a stunning Asian woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Dr. Jennifer Park, neuroscientist from Stanford, married Marcus in 2018, divorced in 2019. When they met at a healthcare conference in San Diego, she'd just developed a revolutionary diagnostic tool for early Alzheimer's detection. Company valued at $18 million. My hands started trembling. What happened to her? Marcus happened. James pulled out financial records. He convinced her to add him to business accounts for tax optimization. Sound familiar? Then he systematically positioned himself as essential to her success. When they divorced 13 months later, Dr. Park walked away with $7 million. Marcus got $11 million, claiming he'd been instrumental in her company's growth. "Oh my God," I whispered. James wasn't finished. He showed me another photograph, a beautiful black woman with short natural hair and sad eyes. Dr. Olivia Reeves, MIT quantum physicist, married Marcus in 2015, divorced in 2017. She'd inherited a portfolio of quantum computing patents from her mentor worth $30 million. Inherited? I felt sick. During their marriage, Marcus convinced her he could help monetize the patents through his venture capital connections. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd maneuvered himself into a position to claim he'd enhanced their value. Settlement gave him $15 million. Dr. Reeves was so devastated, she left MIT and stopped publishing research entirely. David was frantically taking notes. 3 successful women scientists, 3 inheritance situations, 3 divorces where Marcus walked away with millions. How is this not fraud? Because he's smart, James said grimly. He changes cities between marriages. He adjusts his approach slightly each time, learns from whatever mistakes he made before. He targets brilliant women who are too focused on their work to see the con coming. Women who believe in love more than they believe in protecting themselves with prenups. But wait, I said, my mind racing. If there's a pattern, if he's done this before, surely someone reported him. Someone must have seen. James pulled out another thick folder, and my heart started pounding. That's not even the best part, Sarah. Marcus hasn't just been setting you up for divorce. He's been actively stealing from you for the past 18 months. He spread out bank statements, transaction records, corporate filings. $2.7 million moved through a series of shell companies over the past year and a half. Every single one of them traces back to accounts controlled jointly by Marcus Sterling and Victoria Ross. They've been embezzling from Neogene's operating accounts, from your patent licensing revenue streams, even from your personal investment portfolio. Victoria's involved? My voice came out as a whisper. Up to her perfectly manicured fingernails, James confirmed. She's been helping him launder money through fake consulting arrangements and fictitious investment opportunities. They've been planning this divorce for over a year, Sarah. The affair wasn't a betrayal of passion, it was a business partnership. David looked up from his notes, and for the first time in months, he was smiling. Sarah, we don't just have a defense anymore. We have a nuclear weapon. And we're about to detonate it in Judge Martinez's courtroom. The silence in the federal courthouse was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Judge Martinez had finished reading every document on the USB drive I'd given him. All the evidence James Morrison had compiled over 3 weeks of relentless investigation. All the proof of Marcus's pattern, his lies, his theft. Marcus had stopped laughing completely. His face had gone from confident tan to the color of old newspaper. Jacobson was frantically whispering in his ear, but Marcus seemed frozen, his green eyes wide with something that looked like genuine fear for the first time since I'd known him. Judge Martinez removed his reading glasses and cleaned them slowly, methodically. The entire courtroom held its breath. When he put them back on, his expression had transformed from judicial neutrality to barely controlled fury. "Mr. Jacobson," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "I strongly suggest you advise your client to remain absolutely silent for what I'm about to say." Jacobson opened his mouth, then closed it. Even he seemed to realize they were in catastrophically deep trouble. Judge Martinez turned to face Marcus directly. "Mr. Sterling, in 32 years on this bench, I have seen countless cases of marital misconduct, financial disputes, custody battles, even occasional fraud. But what I have reviewed here represents one of the most calculated, predatory, and frankly evil schemes I have ever encountered." Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "Your Honor, if I could just—" "You will remain silent," Judge Martinez's voice boomed through the courtroom. "I am not finished, and you will hear every word of this." He held up a printed document. "This is a detailed forensic investigation showing that you, Mr. Sterling, systematically embezzled $7 million from your wife's business accounts and patent revenue streams over the past 18 months. Money that you moved through multiple shell companies registered under fraudulent business names." The gallery erupted in shocked gasps. I heard someone in the back whisper, "Holy shit." "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, his voice rising, "this investigation reveals that you have perpetrated this exact same scheme against 2 previous wives. Dr. Jennifer Park of Stanford, from whom you extracted $11 million through false claims of business contribution, and Dr. Olivia Reeves of MIT, from whom you extracted $15 million using nearly identical tactics." He slammed the papers down on his bench. "You are not a venture capitalist, Mr. Sterling. You are a con artist who targets brilliant women scientists, particularly those with inherited wealth, and you systematically destroy their lives for profit." Marcus's face had gone from white to green. He looked like he might vomit right there in federal court. "Additionally," Judge Martinez's voice dropped to something colder and more dangerous, "the evidence shows that your accomplice, Miss Victoria Ross, actively participated in establishing fraudulent accounts and received payments from stolen funds. Miss Ross is currently being arrested at Sterling Ventures offices as we speak. Federal agents are also executing search warrants at your shared residence in Seaport." "Your Honor, please." Marcus tried to stand, but Jacobson yanked him back down. "I can explain all of this. There are legitimate—" "Mr. Sterling, you will be silent, or I will hold you in contempt." Judge Martinez stood up, his robes making him look like an avenging angel of justice. "Here is my ruling. Not only will you receive exactly $0 from this divorce, not 1 penny, but you are hereby ordered to pay Dr. Chen full restitution of $2.7 million for the funds you embezzled. Additionally, you will pay $5 million in punitive damages for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and what I can only describe as weaponized cruelty." He picked up his gavel, and I watched Marcus physically flinch. "Dr. Chen will retain 100% ownership of Neogene Therapeutics, 100% of her late father's patent portfolio, and all marital assets. You, Mr. Sterling, will leave this marriage with precisely what you brought into it. Nothing." The gavel came down like thunder. "Furthermore, I am directing that complete copies of all evidence be forwarded immediately to the United States Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Sterling, you are looking at federal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and potentially RICO violations given the pattern of your criminal enterprise across state lines." Another strike of the gavel. "Bailiff, please take Mr. Sterling into custody pending his arraignment on federal charges." Everything happened fast after that. 2 federal marshals approached Marcus, who had completely collapsed in his chair like a puppet with cut strings. As they helped him stand and began reading him his Miranda rights, he turned to look at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The calculated charm was gone. All that remained was confusion mixed with terror, like he genuinely couldn't understand how his perfect plan had fallen apart. "Sarah," he called out, as the marshals led him toward the courtroom doors, his voice cracking. "Sarah, please. We can work this out. I do love you. I did love you. Please." I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in 4 years, feeling like myself again. No, Marcus, you loved my money. You loved my father's legacy. You loved what I could give you. But you never loved me. And honestly, I'm grateful, because now I know exactly what kind of man you are, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other women don't fall for it. The courtroom doors closed behind him with a final, satisfying thud. David put his hand on my shoulder. It's over. You're free. I looked around the courtroom. At Judge Martinez, who delivered justice with such clear-eyed fury. At the gallery full of strangers who'd witnessed Marcus Sterling's complete destruction. At the empty chair where my lying, cheating, stealing husband had sat just minutes before, thinking he'd won. For the first time in 4 years, I could breathe. My father had always told me that good science required patience, precision, and the courage to follow evidence wherever it led, even when it contradicted your hypothesis. He'd been teaching me something bigger than just research methodology. He'd been teaching me about life. Sometimes the experiment fails. Sometimes your hypothesis is wrong. Sometimes the person you thought you knew turns out to be someone entirely different. But if you're brave enough to follow the evidence, if you're strong enough to stand up for yourself, justice exists. 6 months later, I sat in a sunny coffee shop in Cambridge with 2 women I never expected to meet. Dr. Jennifer Park had kind eyes and a firm handshake. Dr. Olivia Reeves had a warm smile and brought homemade Korean snickerdoodles that she said her grandmother's recipe. I can't believe you found us, Jennifer said, stirring her cappuccino. When David Park reached out, I almost didn't respond. I've spent 4 years trying to forget Marcus Sterling ever existed. I spent 6 years, Olivia added quietly. I stopped publishing research, stopped going to conferences. I let him take more than money, I let him take my confidence. That ends now, I said firmly. We're not victims anymore. We're survivors, and we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. I've set up a foundation called the Science Widow Fund, helping women in STEM who are facing predatory divorces or financial exploitation. Our combined legal experience, our evidence against Marcus, our mission to expose and stop the next Marcus Sterling. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. He took 11 million from me, but he didn't take my strength. I want to help. I'm in, Olivia said immediately. What do you need? I need you to tell your stories, to testify at Marcus's criminal trial, to help other women recognize the red flags we all missed. We clinked our coffee cups together. 3 brilliant scientists who'd been targeted, exploited, and nearly broken by the same predator. But we'd survived. And now, we were going to fight back. To Marcus Sterling, I said with a grim smile. May he rot in federal prison. To Marcus Sterling, they echoed, and to making sure there's not another one. Marcus's trial was set for next spring. The prosecution had built a case using evidence from all 3 of our marriages, plus 2 more women James Morrison had found women who'd settled quietly, too ashamed to come forward, but who were now ready to testify. Victoria Ross had already pleaded guilty to conspiracy and agreed to testify against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. Turned out, she wasn't just his accomplice, she'd been his 4th target. He'd promised her 20% of my settlement as payment for her help. She'd believed him. Another brilliant woman. Another con. The prosecutor told me Marcus was looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. His venture capital license had been revoked. Sterling Ventures had collapsed. Every client had pulled their money. His reputation was obliterated. But more importantly, his pattern had been exposed. Universities were using our case in their ethics classes. Business schools were teaching it as a cautionary tale about financial predators. Women's organizations were sharing our story as a warning about red flags in relationships. My father's patents stayed exactly where they belonged in a research foundation bearing his name, making cancer treatments affordable for families who couldn't afford Big Pharma's prices. Every licensing fee went toward developing new therapies, toward helping kids like Marcus's fictitious nephew actually existed. Neogene Therapeutics just got full FDA approval for our first CRISPR-based treatment. We're projecting to help 50,000 patients next year alone. And me? I'm finally living the life my father wanted for me. Doing meaningful work, helping people. Standing on my own 2 feet. I never did get that fairy tale ending, but I got something better. I got my freedom, my strength, my voice. And I learned that sometimes when you stand up for yourself, when you follow the evidence and fight for what's right, the universe doesn't just stand with you. It brings you an army.